Welcome to Octane Vane. Today we're taking a closer look at the E21 Racecar. Today is all about the E21. I'll be bringing you up to speed on where the project is at the moment and why the car is currently off the road and the problems that I need to solve in order to get it back up and running. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and how I came into E21 ownership and what I've done to this car over the last 6 years. But more importantly, I'll tell you all the plans that I've got for this car that are going to keep me busy for the next few months and actually well into next year. If you haven't seen the first episode, check it out in the link below. It gives you a quick overview of what the channel's about, the projects I'm working on at the moment, and the kind of stuff that I'll be bringing you over the next few episodes. Now the E21 is currently off the road. Now the reason the car is off the road is on the way to the MOT at the end of last year, I had a wheel bearing seize, which caused the front right wheel to lock up, and that actually snapped the spindle that the wheel bearings sit on. When that happened, the only thing holding the wheel onto the car was the disc running inside the caliper, so I was very lucky that it stayed on the car and didn't cause an accident. Although I was thankful that I was able to pull the car safely into a lay-by, I was absolutely gutted that instead of getting it through the MOT and being able to enjoy driving the car again, I had to wait to be recovered and had a whole new problem to solve. A problem that resulted in the car being off the road for a further 12 months. Considering the E21 had already been off the road for 2 years whilst I fabricated the roll cage, that was a setback I really hadn't planned for. The solution involved me creating a full 3D CAD model of the entire suspension assembly and then sending both struts off to a machine shop to get them modified so I could upgrade them with parts from a more modern BMW. But before I get into that, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've always loved cars, and from a young age I would watch the touring cars, the rallying, and the Formula 1. And that was back in the day when you had to get up in the middle of the night to watch the Formula 1, because races were broadcast live at local time. As a kid I had radio controlled cars, and I enjoyed building them just as much as I did driving them. And to be honest, not a lot has changed in the last 30 years, except the toys are now bigger and a little bit more expensive. I'm a mechanical engineer by profession and lucky enough to be working for a great automotive company here in the UK. So everything I do down here at the garage is just as a hobby that I do in my spare time. Before this job I was working at Garage Sinister, which started out as an importer of predominantly high performance rear wheel drive Japanese cars. But I joined them as they were branching out into fabrication work, with projects such as the full restoration of a rare BR Nissan Skyline R32, engine swaps including a 4-litre BMW V8 into a beige 1979 Toyota Chaser to create the ultimate sleeper, and custom roll cage fabrication. Now the Chaser wasn't my first V8 swap. I'd already fitted a 5.7 litre Chevy V8 into my Toyota Supra that I used for drifting and track days, a job I did pretty much entirely on my driveway. The first proper journey I did in the Supra after fitting the V8 was down to London for the 2010 Miss Banzai Tunnel Run, and out of 444 cars they awarded me Car of the Night. I was amazed because it was nowhere near finished. I had all my tools in the boot, I was wearing scruffy clothes because I fully expected something to go wrong with the car and I'd have to fix it at the side of the road, or more likely be taken home on the back of a flatbed. Luckily, neither of those things happened, and it got me home without any problems. I was so honoured to receive Car of the Night, because some of the cars there were absolutely stunning and had had thousands of hours and thousands of pounds spent on them, so that was a fantastic christening for the Supra in its new V8 form. I'll bring you more information on the Supra build later in the series. Now Garage Sinister were building their own E21 Racecar, and when the garage shut down in 2018, we brought both E21s down to this unit along with a lot of the equipment, including the tube bender for making roll cages. So the only sensible thing for me to do was to cage my E21 whilst I had the kit on hand. I thought I'd be able to throw it in about 6 months, but as with every project it took a lot longer. It actually took almost 2 years. I wasn't actually looking for an E21 when I bought this car. My favourite car of all time is the BMW E9. Now that's the 3 litre CS, or the CSL was the lightweight version. I did actually own an E9. In fact, I owned an E9 when I bought the E21, but the reason I bought the E21 is because the E9 was so rusty, even the professionals said there wasn't enough car to weld repair panels to. So with my dream of owning a drivable E9 well out of reach, I thought the next best thing would be to look at the E10. That's the little sister of the E9, the 2002 from the late 60s. So I started looking for an E10, but there weren't many for sale, and those that were available were all pretty rusty and needed a lot of work. This E21 came up in my search results, and I'd never really considered an E21 before. The E21 has always been a bit overlooked when it comes to classic BMWs, and I think the reason for that is there was never a really fast road-going version. The E10 before it had the 2002 turbo, and when you think of pioneering turbo cars from the 70s, 3 spring to mind. The Saab 99, the Porsche 911 and the BMW 2002. Now these were all quick cars for the time, especially considering that the Saab and the BMW maintained the practicality of a family saloon. And then of course, after the E21, there was the E30 M3, which was blisteringly quick for a road car. If we plot the power figures for the BMWs on a graph, you can see that the 2002 turbo had 168 brake horsepower, the E30 M3 had 197 brake horsepower, and we can see that the E21's 141 brake horsepower is way down. Plotting a trend line between the E10 and the E30, we can see that the E21 should have had 182 brake horsepower, so it's 40 horsepower down, which is a lot. So did BMW just drop the ball with the E21? I don't think so. BMW knew how important the motorsport division was, and that it tied its racing cars to its road cars. So it must have been a conscious decision, and possibly one that robbed the E21 of the status symbol it deserved. I was intrigued by the reasons that BMW would do this, so I did some research, and I'll present that in another video after this one. Needless to say, this E21 caught my eye, so I went to test drive it, and I knew instantly this was the car for me. It was already stripped out with a pair of bucket seats fitted, which was good as I could see the condition of the floor pan, which wasn't too bad. But the real clincher was the way it drove. There's no ABS, no power steering, it's just a raw driving experience that puts a smile on your face every time. I do think the popularity of the E21 is on the up. There was a Top Gear episode last year where Chris Harris falls in love with the 323, and I'm sure that has sparked a lot of people's memories of these great and underappreciated cars. My prediction is that we're going to start seeing a lot more E21s being dragged out of barns and restored, especially as the prices over the last 12 months have increased significantly. When I bought this car 7 years ago, it was a real unfinished project. It was really unreliable and had loads of issues. The starter motor was temperamental, the brake calipers were seized on, the fuel hoses were perished, the wiring was a complete mess, plus it only had one fog light fitted and that wasn't even wired up. They're all little jobs, but things that the previous owner obviously didn't have time to do. So once I'd got all those fixed, in October 2015, I took the E21 to the Nürburgring. I'll bring you details of that trip in another episode, and you can find out whether the E21, with only 80 brake horsepower, managed to do the bridge to gantry in the magic sub 10 minutes. I mentioned in the intro episode that I've got a long list of jobs to do to this car, but for now I just want to tell you what I'm going to do over the next 12 months or so. The current job is to fix the front spindles, and that's covered in the second half of this episode, so that job can be ticked off. The spindle upgrade changes the hubs from 4-stud to 5-stud, and that's another job that I wanted to do, so the spindle snapping was a good opportunity to make that upgrade. A 4-stud hub is one that uses 4 nuts or bolts to hold the wheel onto the car. A 5-stud hub uses 5 bolts, usually placed around a larger diameter. Using the E36 5-stud hubs means I also have to use the E36 discs, which are bigger and have a different offset. The next episode is all about the brakes and whether I choose to keep the Volvo 4-pots or upgrade to different calipers. The rear end of the E21 is still 4-stud, so in order to use a matching set of wheels, I need to upgrade that to 5-stud as well. Luckily, that's a much easier job because I can use parts from an E28, which is the 5 series from the same era, which, along with 5-stud hubs, also has rear disc brakes, another upgrade I was planning on doing to the E21, so that's 2 jobs sorted in one. I also have throttle bodies from a Nissan Pulsar GTI-R and a standalone ECU to drive them, which should increase power from the current 80 brake horsepower to somewhere around 130. The GTI-R was turboed, and I also have the inlet manifold, so one option for more power would be to turbo the M10. However, I'm also considering a swap for a 6-cylinder engine, something like an M52 from an E36, because although the Group 5 E21 touring cars were turbocharged 4-cylinder M10s, the BMW should really, in my opinion, be a 6-cylinder. Maybe there's an option to do both and have it easily swappable. I've also got some plans to change the way the car looks, but I'm not going to tell you what they are just yet. Let's get back to the broken spindle. I've now been recovered back to the unit and I've got the broken strut assembly off the car. Now I've got the unit off the car and onto the bench, I can start looking at how I'm going to go about fixing this. The easiest way is just to take a replacement knuckle from another E21 and weld that in place of this broken one. The problem with that is it leaves me in the same situation that I was in before, and that is with old bearing technology and thin spindles off the base spec of the E21. Now, as this is going to be a track car, I'm going to be running slick tyres and it's going to be running on circuits that have grippier surfaces. Those forces going through those front wheels are going to be much higher. So I'm taking this as an opportunity to upgrade and put something bigger and stronger on there. Now, looking at the younger 3 series, we've got the E30 and then the E36. The E36 actually has an integrated hub and wheel bearing. I actually have one here. So as you can see, this is the hub that the wheel goes onto. That fits over the spindle like that. And this actually has the bearing already integrated into the hub. And then you just have the 2 halves of the inner race that slot inside, and they would sit over there. Now this is much better because the nut that goes in here and tightens up onto the spindle thread can be done up to a serious amount of torque, and it doesn't affect the performance of the bearings, unlike the taper roller bearings that you have on the E21 at the moment. So now we've had a look at the bearing in the hub, let's have a look at the spindle and the rest of the assembly and see how different they really are. So placing these side by side, you can really see the difference in diameter of that spindle. Looking at the parts in 3D CAD software, I can measure the diameter of the original E21 spindle, which is 29mm at the largest diameter where the bearing sits. Bringing in the E36 spindle shows how much bigger it is. It measures 37mm, so that's an additional 8mm in diameter, which doesn't sound a lot, but it's an increase of 27%, and when compared on the screen, it's clear how significant it is. The reason the E36 parts are much bigger is down to its increased weight. The E21 weighs 1,020 kilograms and the E36 328 is 1,395 kilograms. That's a difference of 375 kilograms, or the equivalent of driving around with a Honda Fireblade in the boot, and having one strapped to the bonnet. Unfortunately, the E36 hub and bearing don't just fit straight onto the E21 spindle. I need to increase the diameter of the remaining part of the E21 spindle up to 37mm. That kind of additive manufacturing is way beyond anything I have access to, so that's not an option. But I can increase the diameter of the spindle by making a separate sleeve, or an adapter spindle that fits over the top of the broken E21 spindle that will take the E36 bearing. The only problem with that is the main section of the E21 spindle is tapered, so the adapter spindle will naturally want to fall off that sloping surface. But what I can do is machine the E21 spindle down so that it's parallel, and then the adapter spindle can sit on top of that without sliding off. The last thing to do is add a couple of pilot holes in the adapter so dowel pins can be pressed and welded in place for added strength. Bringing the E36 hub back in shows the larger diameter that the two rows of ball bearings sit on, compared to the diameter of the rollers in the E21 taper roller bearings. Unfortunately, I also don't have the machines needed to machine the spindle down or to fabricate the sleeve, so I created this 3D CAD model of the entire suspension assembly in order to use that to create a technical drawing which I can send to a machine shop so they can do the machining. Here the spindles can be seen with the adapters pressed on, but before the TIG welding operation. The pilot holes for the dowel pins can also be seen on the underside of the adapter spindle. And now, with the welding complete on the circumference of the base and with the dowel pins plug welded in place. Both parts were then stripped back to bare metal, repainted with several coats of green and refitted to the car. The spindles are given a light coat of grease and the hubs are fitted. The hub nuts are only pinched up as they will be coming off again soon, so there's no need to torque them up at this stage. The disc is fitted and secured in place with a new disc bolt, which is also given a light coat of grease. Next, the wheel can be fitted. Whenever using power tools to torque up any bolt, make sure you have a good few turns of thread engaged by hand before using the power tool. This will prevent cross-threading and stripping threads. Clearance between the wheel and the suspension strut is checked before the car is lowered onto the ground. Well, this truly is a momentous occasion. The E21 is back on all four wheels for the first time in 9 months. Now, I haven't got any brakes yet, that's the next job, but what I'm going to do now is check all the fluids, start the engine up, get it up to temperature, check everything is okay, and maybe go for a cheeky little drive around the block. So as you can hear, the fan has come on, which means the engine has got up to temperature and the radiator fan has kicked in, so that's all good. There's no leaks, every level is as it should be, so I'm really happy. The car is back on its wheels. This is a major step forwards. It's been a long time off the road, as I said, 9 months just because of the wheel bearing failing. It's been a bit of a downer, but this is a big moment, so I'm going to crack on, get the brakes done, and hopefully this car will be back MOT'd and back on the road very soon. Thanks for watching. If you've got any questions or comments about this episode, please leave them below. Make sure you check out the next episode where I choose which brake calipers to use and then design custom mounting brackets to fit them to the E21. Hit that subscribe button so you get notified as soon as that's uploaded. But until then, take care and look after each other.